It's a new year, so we have new music. I'm Shirley Sykes. Sunday Insight starts right now. Okay, that's kind of impressive. Good morning. Welcome to Sunday Insight in the week that was a brutal start to the new year on Wall Street as stocks plummet. North Korea says that it tested a hydrogen bomb. President Obama takes executive action on gun control. The Packers limp into the playoffs and face off against the politically incorrect Washington team later today. Under court order, the former John Doe prosecutor sends out 159 letters informing conservative activists that he had seized their emails and other records for years as part of the now-defunct investigation without telling them. A former Milwaukee man is charged with lying about his links to terrorism. And city officials finally apologized for botching that snow cleanup. But we start with a documentary that has captured national attention. The Stephen Avery case has never lacked for drama or intrigue. Wrongfully convicted of a rape he did not commit, Avery was exonerated through DNA evidence and became the poster child for the flaws in the criminal justice system. But then Avery, along with his nephew Brendan Dassey, were charged and convicted in the gruesome murder of Teresa Halbach. But now, this new documentary, The Making of a Murderer, is raising questions about that conviction, suggesting that Avery might have been framed, that police might have planted evidence, that he and Dassey are innocent. Well, that is a claim strongly disputed by law enforcement and prosecutors who continue to insist that the evidence is overwhelming, that both men were guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
The fact that there is DNA under the victim's hood is not explainable. And because it's inconsistent with the narrative of the documentary, of the defense-generated documentary, because it was inconsistent, it was not included.
But the film has become a national phenomenon. Hundreds of thousands of viewers have signed petitions asking that Avery and Dassey be pardoned. So far, Governor Scott Walker says he has no intention of freeing either Avery or his nephew. Joining me on our panel this morning, the Milwaukee Community Journal's Mikel Holt, former State Representative Michelle Litjens, defense attorney Dan Adams, and the managing editor of RightWisconsin.com, Collin Roth. Okay, Dan Adams, you are the defense attorney here.
I'm in the hot seat.
And you've actually watched this. Your take. Are you persuaded?
Well, I'm amazed at the millions of new criminal defense attorneys that have sprung up overnight. Yeah. And bad for me, a lot of competition. I've watched the whole thing. Not to be too much of a Monday morning quarterback, but I think two things are pretty clear. One, if you read documents beyond the documentary, Stephen Avery is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Let's be honest. But two, the Manitowoc Sheriff's Department clearly did some improper things in their investigation, and the DA, the former DA, who we know now is completely discredited, really took a hard line, did some stuff in the media that was inappropriate. I'm just glad that people are now paying attention to the criminal justice system. I just wish that there was an actually factually innocent person to get behind.
I mean, obviously there's some legitimate questions that could be raised. So what makes you come to the conclusion that he's still guilty beyond a reasonable doubt?
The guy had a bonfire the night before they found these remains, and there's no way that those remains could have been carried in, feet from his trailer.
Now, in order to believe that he in fact is innocent, you have to believe a lot of things, including that the police might have intentionally planted this evidence. I mean, this is not just a misunderstanding, right? I mean,
I think they probably did plant the key in his trailer, but that doesn't change anything. It's kind of the Mark Furman, O.J. Simpson thing. We know he planted the bloody glove in L.A. 15 years ago, but that didn't change that. O.J. probably did.
So everybody in this thing is bad, but Brendan Dassey and Stephen Avery. What about the Brendan Dassey part? Because a lot of people are focusing on the interrogation. The kid is not the brightest bulb. Actually, nobody in this movie is the brightest bulb.
And if there is a silver lining to this terrible monstrosity of a case, I think it is shedding light on coercive police tactics, especially with juveniles.
Okay, now you lived up in that area. You remember the trial. Your take on this?
Oh yeah. Oh, we watched it every day, and he's obviously guilty. Yeah. And doesn't this say something for documentaries too? You would have expected when they say the word documentary that they're giving both sides, but they excluded so much information. The fact that her cell phone and PDA were in the burn pile right next to his house. There was so much information. The bleach that was splashed up on his nephew's pants. The fact that he just confessed to everything that happened, and he obviously wasn't smart enough to make this all up on his own. So we know he was guilty. It's disappointing to see so many people out there duped because they only received one side of the story.
Well, again, you know, part of the power, though, of a documentary is that they can frame the narrative. They can make it very, very dramatic. They can decide which facts they're going to present, which facts they withhold, and it's certainly understandable. Well, if that's the only thing you know about this case, if you're not from around here, particularly if this is the only thing you know about this case, it's going to raise a lot of questions in your mind.
Yeah, and I tend to agree with Dan. My impression of it is there's the distinct possibility of the framing a guilty man, that some of the things were incorrect. But I kind of wish it would have lived up to its title. I think there was a chance where they could have examined, did those 18 years in prison create a murderer? What did that impact have on this man who was wrongfully convicted and ends up committing this heinous crime?
Mikel Holt.
Yeah, and I guess the worst part about this is it tried to make, and probably did, make Steve Avery a victim, but was he really the victim? Yeah. I mean, it's just like they just grossed over the real victim in this.
Well, this is a great point because a couple of people, including a reporter up in that area, wrote a Facebook post where she said, look, you know, Teresa Halbach is being victimized again here because she's only mentioned by a couple of minutes. You have a 10-hour documentary, and she's almost like it's a, you know, an afterthought. And the reality is we need to remember that these are real people. This really happened. It's not just a, you know, a water, you know, standing around the water cooler to be able to discuss this. It is interesting. I do think there's a legitimate skepticism that somebody watching this will be able to be more skeptical about the way law enforcement sometimes goes about its tactics. And I think we've seen through a number of different investigations that sometimes, you know, let's be honest about it, the investigators, you know, can overreach. They can engage this. On the other hand, as you point out, Michael, let's, you know, if everybody on this panel is right, and Stephen Avery is guilty, think about what we are seeing here. You know, a vicious, sadistic monster who is now the object of all of this sympathy and all of this attention. You know, you could certainly argue that Stephen Avery is the most famous, you know, convicted criminal in America, and for what? For being an effective con man to convince these folks to do this documentary? And what is your glass half full? What is your glass half empty this week? Let's go around the table. Michael, you're first.
Well, my glass is half empty because in 2008, Rebecca Bradley encouraged candidates for the state Supreme Court not to sign a clean pledge campaign commitment, in essence agreeing not to lie. My glass is half full because now Justice Bradley is running for a full term to the court. Fortunately, there are two other candidates who are committed to truthful campaigns.
Ridiculous. Michelle Litjens.
My glass is half full because Francis Schmidt finally notified everyone who was targeted in the John Doe investigation. It's half empty because Schmidt disclosed very little information to the targets of what he was looking for, and he returned only a handful of confiscated personal items to their owners.
Dan Adams.
Well, my glass is half full because there is now bipartisan support across the state to roll back a recent expansion of government records deemed transitory and thus not subject to open records requests. My glass half empty because it's unclear whether Wisconsin's obscure Public Records Board will do the right thing and abandon their attack on clean government that allows politicians to stonewall citizens' attempts to learn what's happening in our state and local governments.
Collin Roth.
My glass is half full because a new teacher licensure reform is putting qualified individuals with relevant experience in the classroom to teach important job skills. It's half empty because the education establishment and the teachers union are still fighting for their monopoly on teacher training.
Well, my glass is half full because a national publication has named Marquette University President Mike Lovell as the 4th worst college president in the country. Quite an accomplishment when you consider all the competition. My glass is half empty because if Lovell goes ahead and fires Professor John McAdams, he will be the frontrunner for the single worst university president in 2016. Next on Sunday Insight, a man released from prison after serving time for murder now works for a local sheriff's department. Is that appropriate? A convicted murderer on the payroll of a local sheriff's department? Sheboygan County Sheriff Todd Preby is defending the hiring of a man who was convicted of murdering and dismembering a woman back in 1977. That was when Gabriel Macias was 20 years old. Now he's 59, and he served his prison sentence, gotten a degree, turned his life around, and for years has been working as a radio technician. He worked as a contractor for the Sheboygan County Sheriff's Department for 10 years before he was hired full-time. He's never made a secret of his murder conviction, and the sheriff says he doesn't want to throw Macias under the bus now, and calls his employment actually a success story for the criminal justice system that's actually helped somebody turn their life around Michelle Litjens, do you agree?
I have to agree with them. You know, this is someone who did something heinous years ago.
Yeah.
He's repented for it. He served his time. He proved himself as a subcontractor that was very qualified for the county. He's not a police officer. He's not out there directly, you know, interacting with the public. And I think this says a lot for our society. We believe that if you do something wrong, you should be punished, but you should be able to redeem yourself.
Okay, but is there a statute of limitations on murder in this particular case? I mean, he could have received a life sentence. He could have received the death sentence. We don't have a statute of limitations on homicides.
But again, he's not working directly with people. He's fixing radios,
Yeah.
and I do think he served his time and he's proven himself.
Okay, Mikel Holt.
I tend to agree with Michelle. But you know, we're not just talking about murder. I didn't just get mad and shoot somebody. I chopped the body in half. I mean, there has to be, you know, some element of his subconscious that is warped.
Well,
This guy
he was
chopped somebody up.
Okay, he was 20 years old, and I think this is an interesting question. It's not only the question of redemption, but you know, what is the relationship between your 20-year-old self and your 59-year-old self? I mean, he says in this case, he doesn't deny doing what he did. He said it was in a fit of jealousy, and you know, he strangles his live-in girlfriend, and then he wants to cover up the thing. But that was when he was 20 years old. When he's 59, should he still be held accountable for that?
No, I think there is redemption. You know, you say he found Christ. You know, I applaud all of that. But you're saying, you know, there's something beyond just, he didn't just murder somebody.
Right.
He chopped them up.
Okay, so what should the sheriff do?
You got to be accountable or something.
Okay, what does the sheriff do now with this case?
I think eventually he's going to bow to pressure because other law enforcement are putting a lot of pressure on him. And although he said he's not going to backtrack, I think he will.
Okay, Collin Roth.
I mean, there's so much to the story.
Yeah.
One, why does a convicted murderer who dismembered someone get out after 13 years?
Well, that's an issue in and of itself, yes.
I mean, he was given a 40-year sentence and was out after 13. But once he was out, he has been a contributing member of society and has proven himself.
And let's be clear, this wasn't a Wisconsin judge who did this. This was an out-of-state thing. They had some sentencing law that allowed him out. I have a lot of clients who their big thing isn't the jail time, it's not the fine, it's not the probation, the counseling. It's whether they can move on. When all that's over, can they move on in this internet age? Can I get a job? Can I be a good person?
I think the sheriff would have been justified not hiring him in the first place because of this, because it's law enforcement. On the other hand, now that people have worked with him and he's proved himself reliable, I think that it would be grotesquely unfair to throw him under the bus at this particular point. What's interesting about this story is that everyone who's actually worked with him seems to like him, seems to think that he's turned his life around. The people in the prison system think he turned his life around. The sheriff's department did. You may not want to hear it, but we'll tell you anyway. Let's hand out some unsolicited advice. Mikel Holt, you are first.
Well, mine is to the 250,000 people that petitioned President Obama to pardon Steve Avery. Don't waste your time or blame the president. Only the governor can pardon Avery, and he won't.
Michelle Litjens.
To the National Conservative Talk radio hosts and activists, please back Paul Ryan. He's laying out a plan to show the differences between Republicans and Democrats, and he's doing all that he can with a Democrat president. We must unify behind him together so we can defeat the Democrats this fall.
Dan Adams.
Well, my advice is for the state legislature, follow Joint Finance member Dale Koinga's lead and insist that last-minute secretly drafted so-called 999 or wrap-up motions be banned. These motions are vehicles for cronyism and bad policy.
Amen. Collin Roth.
My advice is for politicians of all stripes. Pay attention to the polls showing voters unhappy with the direction of our state and our country. Ask yourself why they're unhappy. Start talking, or stop talking, start listening.
Yeah, good luck with that. My advice is don't make up your mind about a criminal case by watching a video on Netflix, and don't choose a president of the United States by watching a 30-second ad. Hey, who am I kidding? Next on Sunday Inside, why do Milwaukee County supervisors want to issue local ID cards? Another controversy about ID cards. Now, as you know, photo IDs are now required to vote, but the controversy is taking a new twist. Milwaukee County is planning to issue its own local ID cards that could be used for, well, for a number of things, but not to vote. Presumably, the IDs would be available to illegal aliens who would otherwise not be able to obtain at least legally able to obtain state IDs. Milwaukee County's move is being challenged in the legislature, where State Representative Joe Sanfilippo and Senator Van Wanggaard want to block the proliferation of the local IDs. What is this really all about, Collin Roth?
This is about giving identification to illegal immigrants inside Milwaukee County. That is the sole reason. Yeah. I think there's also an attempt to subvert the photo ID law by adding a confusing layer to poll workers, people coming up not knowing, you know, hey, this is a photo ID. I think that's what it's really about.
Okay, Mikel Holt.
Let me date myself. I think it was about, 15 years ago? We had a discussion on this program about a group of Hispanic doctors who were providing services to illegal aliens. Right. And a member of the panel said they shouldn't, even if these illegal aliens were about to die. This, in both cases, is about humanity. These people, whether they're here legally or illegally, and we can't figure out why they're still here, but it's still about whether or not.
I hate on Sunday morning to use Latin, but there's a term called non sequitur, which means does not follow. Your answer has nothing to do with the ID card.
No, it's about humanity. What is should we? I mean, they're here, so should we provide them with some basic services, like get a library card, open up a checking account?
Okay, but that has nothing to do with why Milwaukee County has to issue ID cards. Every person in Wisconsin can get a free ID card. What is the point of Milwaukee County?
Not every person. If you're an undocumented, I don't believe people are illegal. I think people are undocumented.
So what would they do with the ID card?
Well, a number of things. One, like Michael said, open a bank account, enter legitimate society, maybe get insurance for their car, because we know, even though the state of Wisconsin will not issue them a driver's license, they're still driving around. I'd like them to be in a legitimate society rather than the shadows.
But you concede, though, that the entire point here is to give these ID cards to illegal aliens.
Undocumented, yes.
Illegal aliens. Yeah. I think they're doing these people a disservice, actually. We need to fix the problem. We need to get all of these people out of the shadows. We don't need to now encourage them to stay in the shadows. We're giving them a card where they actually think that they are semi-citizens in the state, and they're not.
Actually, the GOP didn't. The fact is, it's the federal law. It is the law of the land. Even the Obama administration is talking about deporting some of the central admin. I guess part of the frustration, Colin's talking about the people who are concerned that the country is going in the wrong way. It is this question, are we a nation of laws anymore? Do we actually have local units of government that not only ignore the law, but are actually facilitating the breaking of the law? I mean,
well, we have dual sovereignty, and if this is something that the city thinks and the county thinks that will help their citizens, I think it's within their
I think it's a waste. It is a waste of money. What is it you don't get? Let's go around the table. Mikel Holt, you're first.
What I want to get is how city officials can blame the weather for the horrible job of plowing 2 weeks ago. Maybe you should also explain why so many trucks were parked in garages while it took 3 hours or 3 days to plow out the central city.
Michelle.
Charlie, I don't get how 2 years ago a Journal Sentinel reporter knew to call a man and ask if his house was raided as part of the John Doe investigation when this person didn't learn he was part of the investigation until last week.
Yeah, Dan Adams.
I don't get how the average U.S. household carries over $15,000 in credit card debt. Friends, fiscal responsibility starts at home. Pay off your balance before you go back on Amazon.com.
Collin Roth.
Yeah, what I don't get is how the newspaper can editorialize over and over about transparency and secrecy in government, but ignore the conduct of John Doe prosecutors who secretly seized emails of innocent activists.
Well, last week, a former Syrian refugee who lives in Milwaukee for a while was charged with lying about his ties to international terrorism. Now, what I don't get is why President Obama isn't more focused on doing background checks on guys like that rather than on law-abiding Americans who want to protect themselves from guys like that. Next on Sunday Inside, our panel picks the winners and losers of the week. But first, here's your morning news update. It's time for our panel to pick the winners and losers of the week. Mikel Holt, you're first.
My winner, President Obama. His executive order to expand background checks on gun purchases may not prove to be a cure-all, but at least he's doing something 85% of Americans see as a common sense strategy. My loser, the constituents of State Representative Bob Gannon, whose racist rant about black crime limiting business growth was not only nonsensical, it was also stupid.
Michelle Litjens.
The winner is the Milwaukee Parental Choice Program. For the past 4 years, Obama's Department of Justice was investigating the choice program for discrimination, and the anti-choice bureaucrats found nothing wrong. Case closed. And could anyone be more of a loser this week than President Obama? During his emotional press conference on gun control, he referred to himself more than 70 times. He said the press conference isn't about me. Well, when you refer to yourself 70 times, it is.
Dan Adams.
Oh boy, well my winner is President Obama for his very eloquent, really masterful speech in support of common sense gun law reform. My losers are the conservative commenters who mocked our president's show of emotion. He's met at length with the parents of 20 children murdered at Sandy Hook Elementary and survivors of other mass shootings. So this is a personal issue for him. So sometimes snark is so misplaced, it is simply offensive.
Collin Roth.
My winner this week is Texas Senator Ted Cruz. He leads in Iowa with less than a month to go, and he is deftly handling the birther arrows from Donald Trump. But what if my loser is President Obama, who chose to focus on gun control in a week when an American was killed in Afghanistan, the North Koreans tested a nuclear device, and Saudi-Iranian tensions threaten to embroil the region in more conflict?
Unfortunately, my winner is Stephen Avery, who is arguably the most famous convicted criminal in America, thanks to that Netflix documentary. Loser, the woman that he murdered, Teresa Halbach, who is barely mentioned in the film and who is effectively being victimized all over again. As one local TV reporter wrote, she deserved better. Thanks for joining us, and join me for my radio show Monday morning on News Radio 620 WTMJ from 8:30 until noon. Have a great week. Go Packers, please.